All right, let's see. Are we live now? Okay, good. Now we are being recorded for posterity. Okay, so as I was saying, thank you for that reminder. As I was saying, we do have the privilege of being, what the plan is to be joined by the author next week. He'll be coming here to this Zoom meeting with us as well. While I haven't personally met Pastor Trewhella, I've been following him for a while, and I know that he's a God-fearing man. He's a man of a lot of character and conviction, and he does say things that are hard and challenging, but sometimes it seems like that's exactly what our nation needs right now. So I'm grateful. We're looking forward to the opportunity to have him join us next week. Mr. Wenzik, do you have a question? He's just raising his hand as he's waving. Pastor Wenzik has a raised hand. Let me see if I can find him here very quickly. Raised hand. There's no high five option here on my control.
There's underreactions on mine. I can high five. Thumbs up. I can laugh. I can love. I can celebrate.
Yep. Let's see. I think maybe Mrs. Wenzik is jumping in too. So it would be good, yeah, if we can get you to be able to talk too, Pastor, if you're able to get your audio to work. I know there's some technical.
Might as well turn your camera on too.
Yeah, throw your camera on maybe. Nothing? Well, we had discussed before a little bit. I had talked to Pastor Wenzik yesterday, and he had said that he's got amazing things to share, but the technology is slightly preventative from the blessing right now. And there was a little bit of fear of that yesterday. So all I can do for you right now, brother, is pray for you. That's about where we're at right now. So hopefully, does everyone have access to the shared doc so they get a chance to see the questions? Get a nod in that. And you know what? I can actually throw that here in the chat too as well if there are people who maybe don't have access to everything. And I can throw that in the chat so everyone can see it. So that'll kind of help us guide us a little bit in this discussion. So the chapters, as we said, there was also a large introduction, maybe not a large introduction, but an introduction there. And man, there's enough material for us to talk about in the introduction alone that hopefully we'll end up getting to as the rest of the study progresses. But I did write out this list of questions, and I'm looking forward to kind of discussing it and hearing from people what you think. So the first three chapters specifically talking about the doctrine defined, rooted in interposition, and all authority delegated. So if Justin, if you could unmute yourself here real quick. I would just like if you could just help us out here, just if you can give us your initial impression of what you know about or what you've learned about from the author, because I know that you've heard some stuff from him, and your initial impressions of why this is of import to us right now, this book.
Well, that's what you call getting put on the spot. It's just fine.
Yeah, shotgun. It's a teacher.
Shotgun straight to the face.
Warning, you'll be called on, and you all next. Well, without question right now, what we're going through as far as the changes that we're seeing, everything from what I will call a plandemic versus a pandemic, it was the perfect tool, in my opinion, for the left to to bring America to its knees, a screeching halt, willingly stay in their homes, willingly, in essence, destroy or work at long-term destroying the economy. I believe the left, I don't understand all the reasons why, but I've told people when I try to explain to them what's happening, I say that you almost have to think like Satan. Not that we are capable, but you have to think, what would the enemy of mankind want to do? Because some of the evil that we're seeing being employed on us only makes sense if you think about the enemy who hates us and wants to destroy us. So when you think about that, if he doesn't love mankind, he wants to take mankind out. He wants to do anything that will distract from God, our focus on God, right? And so that, unfortunately, there's a Luciferian culture in much of Washington, D.C., and there's corruption throughout politics. We know that top to bottom. There are good people. We've got problems in the Republican Party. We have total kind of disaster almost in the Democratic Party. Very few good folks in the mix there. That's my opinion, not anybody else's. But when you consider all that is taking place, and I believe kind of the driving forces to destroy America. They want communist China in control, or at least to have to partner with things that even a year ago we would have had a hard time explaining. Dinesh D'Souza was saying it probably 3 or 4 years ago, but people weren't listening until there was quite a bit more evidence. Now it's undeniable evidence, and it's amazing how quickly Americans in general have just accepted this as the new normal, which I can't accept that, because I don't want to use the term new normal. They want it to be new normal, but I don't accept that. I'm fighting against it. I want to stand against it, do everything we can. The Lesser Magistrates is perfect because it is explaining through several different examples in those first 16 pages or whatever it was, all the different, what Lesser Magistrates are and how they are to stand against tyrannical rule. And so I think it's perfect timing for what we're currently experiencing, and it will help educate us as a people, as a general citizenry, as well as some of us having influence with those that are in office, in how we are to move forward effectively and stop this tyrannical rule in its tracks. And if there's enough of us, it happens in short order.
Sure. Well, great. Good. Thank you. Thank you for that. Those insights. Pastor Wenzik, I think we have you. Can you give me a comm check?
Yeah, I think I can. I'm with you. My wife had to set it up on her computer because I didn't have enough brains to set it up on mine.
I got you 5 by 5, which is good. So thank God for a great helper.
All right. I'm with you.
Okay, so our first question here, and the intent here is kind of an open discussion. Anybody here that has some insight from the panel, please feel free. There's a lot of liberty here. The first question is, have you, and this is supposed to be an introspective question, have you received instruction from the pulpit on the proper functioning of the limitations of the state?
No.
Todd says no.
I would say in general, no. I did run into a figure the odds Southern Baptist pastor that wasn't shy. But as far as instruction, I mean, he had opinion. I don't know if he had instruction so much, but he was at the pulpit and he wasn't afraid to say what he thought. So I did like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with Tim. I'd have to go all the way back to when I was a kid and remembering my Southern Baptist pastor in Missouri, who was fiery, and spoke to the limitations of government and some of those things. But been many years since then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in my case, I would say since the start of the pandemic, my pastor of 25 years really didn't shift gears too much. He recognized some things that were taking place, but he didn't shift gears too much. He was teaching in the book of Mark, continued to teach in the book of Mark, and what was relevant when there was not the current status that we were experiencing was good, but it became irrelevant very quickly. And so expressing some frustrations with that and saying, why aren't you speaking to what we're enduring? And it's a challenging position for a pastor to be in, I understand. But it's still a very good friend of mine, but I've decided to go to church elsewhere where I've found the one and only pastor so far that I know of on the south end of the island that is speaking to the relevant what is taking place and providing his flock direction on what we ought to do. And he's here tonight with us. So that's a great statement to a good shift of direction for sure for me at this time.
Yeah. I guess some of the difficulty maybe in the question is, maybe nowadays we have a lot of resources at our disposal to hear sermons from pastors all over across the country, right? And so it's a little bit of a different situation. You can almost kind of digest what you want kind of at your fingertips sometimes, but on your local week in, week out worship, I think that's that's some of the challenge. It's intrinsic in that, and this concept leads into the second question very, very specifically, because as the book was talking about, there's a much different heritage for our forefathers, the people that we revere, that defended and paid for freedom with their blood. As the question says, our founding fathers came from a heritage of preaching about the dangers of statism, and how does that differ from the preaching today?
I kind of wrote some of my answers out, and my statement is, I think with the 501c status that didn't exist in our founding days, of course, until recently, in my opinion, a lot of times that may have even been developed intentionally by our government, maybe with good intent, maybe without great intent, but it has given a control of our pastors and their input, what they say, how they say it, enough that if you want to maintain that status, that tax exempt status, that it has given the government control and say that they didn't initially have. And it's been a slow transition where our pastors have become more and more irrelevant, softer, and really we have, for the most part, nationwide, maybe 80% lukewarm Christians, those that are Christians that do go to church. And the average person goes to church, let's face it, I think it's less than 2 times, it's 1.5 times a month. For one that says I go to church as a Christian, 1.5 times a month is normal now. Whereas growing up, I remember you didn't make excuses for Sunday unless you were on vacation. You were going to church. And even just 15 years ago, my wife and kids growing up, we had Sunday night services, Wednesday night services. We were pretty intense. Church was a big part of our life. And the pastors have become, I think for the most part, more and more irrelevant. And some of them are worried about losing their 501c3 status, etc. And some churches, the more patriotic of churches, are actually walking away from that status because they recognize the restriction that is forcing them. Other pastors are restricted by their own theologies, by their groups that they are what am I trying to say?
Your education.
No, if you're a Protestant Christian, there's different types. Where you've got this Assembly of God churches. You've got denomination is the word I was blanking on. Thank you. So in order to be part of your denomination, a lot of times there are certain things that you've agreed to maintaining a perspective on, and that can somewhat be restrictive too. Everybody's worried about liability and potentially getting sued for saying the wrong thing or losing status or things along those lines. So I think those have had an impact for sure. And let's face it, we're all affected by our culture. We like to think we aren't, but the reality is we're all affected to some degree. So even the strongest of folks are, and that's part of why the folks, the like-thinking folks in this group tend to hang around most of the time with folks that share their perspective, so that they're maybe not influenced by culture in a negative way. They're hopefully reminding each other iron sharpens iron type environment and keeping each other on track with what God wants in our lives.
I could say that for me personally, for over 20 years, I've been a prepper and I've seen what is coming in the world. And one consistent thing I've heard over and over and over again is that I'm walking in sin because I don't trust in the Lord and I'm preparing. And another thing is all is well because Jesus is going to come and take us away pretty soon. Therefore, it doesn't really matter. And the other thing is this deep-rooted fallacy that we are to obey the government in all things, where our forefathers, they were better educated, stronger, more durable. And let's face it, when you live in a society that you have everything at your fingertips, you become soft. And I think that's primarily where we are as a Christian nation. As a Christian church, our pastors like to tell us that we're the bride of Christ, and Jesus is coming soon, so don't worry about anything. And if you do worry about something like you're preparing and buying food and buying weapons, you're somehow walking in sin. But for me personally, standing in a gap has been a lifetime worldview for me and my family. We protected innocents against bullies. Many of us became police officers. We all served in the military. And it was for a purpose of being a shield to those who are weaker than us. And I think the church is they've walked away from that. They don't know how to fight anymore.
Joseph?
Yes, sir.
All right. I had mentioned to you that I was going to plead the fifth on these two first questions since I am a pastor. In regards to the I always get, Justin knows I always get these numbers mixed up. 503. My wife's helped me out. 501c3. Okay, it was the Johnson Amendment from the 50s that clamped down. It says if you want to have your congregants have a tax benefit for what they give to the church, you can only give only a certain amount of your pulpit can go to politics, and you cannot endorse candidates in your churches. And so we're kind of playing by those rules. Now, having said that, I have preached a number of sermons that have gotten parts of my congregation so mad they've got up and left. I preached a sermon one time called Jesus would be Jesus would be pro-abortion, wouldn't he? And that really upset some people. Another one back in the 80s, I preached a sermon on the Humanist Manifesto, and I gave overheads and went into details about how they were encroaching upon our government and how they had an evil scheme. And I lost some people on that one as well. They said, how dare you preach against our government that way? Recently, as soon as the Black Lives Matter came into being, I stood up in the pulpit and I said, this is an evil, Marxist, anti-American, fascistic organization. We're going to stand against it. And nobody left on that one. But later on, I talked about where the Democrats were taking this country, and I lost some people that way as well. Some people have referred to me as the scourge of the area. And there are things that I feel I need to stand up for, regardless of whether anybody else is standing up for them or not.
Proud to call you my pastor for these very reasons.
Yeah, see, in the Navy, we'd make a patch called that the Scourge, and then we'd wear it.
I was thinking about wearing it around my neck, but they just take it away from me. All right, I've said too much already.
Yeah, I thought so interesting that Justin had mentioned a little bit about that. About the things that I guess pastors are worried about, what they're putting at risk. And I guess a follow-up question, which is not in your notes, is I wonder if when you think about the historical preaching, and it's hard because most of us probably haven't read old sermons. They actually used to give election sermons. Can you believe that? They gave a sermon on the Sunday before the election about preaching about how important it was and what the specific issues of the day were. But do we think that, since our nation was birthed out of this culture, that those preachers not taking any risks at that time?
Yeah, if you're directing the question towards me, I
No,
can
no, I'm
verify.
not personally, but yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I can verify. I've read some of those sermons, and some of them got very specific. And our government had it organized itself against the churches yet. But as you look at what's happening today, I mean, the Democratic Party has taken God out of their platform. They are working extra hard towards persecuting the church. I saw just recently where they made reference to different groups and people that needed to be neutralized. And I'm not sure if that was the word, but it was Trump supporters, conservatives, churches in general, and pastors. And so the heat is on, and the time to stand is now. And so that's where I'm at.
Good. Anybody else there have any insight in historical preaching or?
Well, if you look at what Pastor Wensick was talking about, and I'm sure Joe, you were kind of alluding to this as well. It's not something new for our Christian pastors, preachers, priests, whatever you want to call them, through the years, to be persecuted for their religion, right? What's new about it is it's new to America. See, when we came here, the primary reason we came to our country was for religious freedom, to be able to worship the way we want to worship and develop a nation based on Christian fundamentals. The book talks about that, so I don't really need to get into that with you guys. You've all read it. However, what we've done is over the last, I would say, and Pastor Wensick, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I would say over the last 80 to 90 years, the government has been meticulously trying to remove God from our culture, Christianity from our culture. And then particularly over the last, I would say 40 to 45 years, when you see actually what you were talking about, Pastor Wensick, in the mid 50s, actually I think it was late 50s, when that actually went through, when it finally got signed, the 501c3, and you can't preach from the pulpit and all that kind of good garbage. But that's when it really hit, right? So they started taking the 10 Commandments out of courts. They started taking prayer out of the schools. And now you see that you can't even talk about Christianity. Yeah. I had my Bible at work today. I work on the base, and I was reading, I read that whole book, right? The Lesser Magistrate. And then I realized, heck, I still need to read all the footnotes, and figured I didn't even make it a fraction of the way through the actual reading after I started looking at the footnotes. So I had these books out, and even on the base, when I was sitting there at my station reading the Bible in this book, I got a couple of odd looks. Not that they were mad at me or ashamed that I was doing this, but they were kind of freaked out, I think, that I was publicly letting everybody know where I stood just by the books I was reading and the attitude I had. And so when you think about it, it's the systematic dismantling of our Christian beliefs over an extended period of time, and we're at that culmination of where we either are going to be those lesser magistrates, you and I, not the commissioner, not the sheriff. I mean, they can be too, but we can be that lesser magistrate, and we can stand up, and we can have that Bible in our hand, and we can go out and tell people that we're not shy about being Christians. Yep. So I think that's kind of where that progression has went, and I think we can take it back. It's just going to take all of us to do it.
Yeah,
we can't onesie-twosie it.
Joe, can I give some dates to what he was just bringing up, if would
Sure.
be interest?
Sure.
1843, Horace Mann began to remove Christianity from 1843, began removing Christianity from school. 1933, John Dewey started the secular humanists. Again, he began even in a greater way to advance humanism, which is what's taught in the public education today. In 1948, there was a stare decisis decision from the Supreme Court that they could not teach Christianity in schools anymore. And then in 1962, Madame Marie O'Hare took prayer out of school as well. And it's been one step after another since then. It's been going down. The ball started rolling in 1843. And then it picked up a little bit of steam in 1933, and then picked up a little bit more in 1948, and then picked up a little bit more in 1962, and now about every 2 or 3 years, they're chopping away a little bit more. The decision to remove God from the platform was during Barack Obama's Democratic convention, and so the left has effectively removed God from their position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that, Pastor. And then, that kind of leads into well into our third question. And I am seeing these comments here, so those are good. Those are also a benefit too. So thank you for that here. I'll if you want to take notes on different resources that have blessed me. There's a DVD. It's probably a stream available now, but it's called the DVD, or the series was one video. It's called Indoctrination, and it was done by Colin Gunn, and he talks about some of the very same concepts that Pastor Wenzik is discussing about Horace Mann, and about the ideology of the tabula rasa, the view of a student being a blank slate, that we can write anything we want on this blank slate, and he is totally moldable and shapeable by his environment in any way, shape, or form. And there's a lot of these ideas and principles that are intrinsic in a humanist perspective versus a Christian perspective. And so this third question kind of gets into that. When we're talking about resistance to statist abuse, how would resistance to statist abuse be manifest outside of firm theological and ecclesiastical support? And if I'm using terms that you guys don't know, I mean, Google it, of ecclesiastical just meaning with regard to support from the church formally, the formal church structure, that entity.
Yeah. I'll take a stab at it first, and I'm sure people can join in then. Now you're asking, how would we challenge the statist position if we did use God and His Word? Yeah, and with support from the church. I wrote down, it would just be, people would say, I don't like it, or possibly it violates my conscience, since we all have conscience. But after that, I'm not sure what they would say. Mm-hmm. Other than, I'm stronger than you, I don't want it this way.
Maybe, yeah.
Exactly. Well, that dog has something to say. Yeah. On that same note, it's interesting when you read the book. He talks about how the doctrine, not necessarily the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, but the reasoning behind it and the thought pattern behind it started before Christianity really added to it and turned it into a doctrine and turned it into a belief. So people have been doing this lesser magistrate activity for thousands of years, even before back during the Jewish days, right? He talked about Nebuchadnezzar, and he talked about Abednego and being thrown in the fiery pit and things of that nature. And so, I guess what I'm trying to say is if you have a moral belief, it's hard for us to believe that people could have morals without Christianity, because we've always had God in our lives, right? Or been aware of it, at least. Even if, like me, I wasn't a real God-fearing person when I was young. I was raised Catholic. We went to church once a week and repented our sins, and then sinned the rest of the week until the next week. But so with that being said, you don't necessarily have to be a God-fearing person to know when something's right or wrong. I think human nature is that we want to protect the weak, right? And so I'll give you for instance. I've been in many a brawl. You can probably tell by my bent nose and the scars on my eyes over the years, protecting a young lady at a bar from being molested by a man, or helping a kid that was being bullied at school, stepping between him and his assailants. And so we can do that without Christianity. I think what Christianity does is it gives us that anchor. It gives us that belief and that set of non-changeable rules. It is what it is. We as human beings can't change God's law, period. And so there's that foundation that we can always reflect back to. So can you do it without it? Yes. It's a lot easier to have that foundation to stand on, though. That's what I believe.
How do you do it without a moral foundation? If you don't have God, you don't have morals or ethics, and you get to make up laws willy-nilly. How would you combat that? How would you have any type of moral or ethical laws that better the society without some type of ethic? And then if you have an ethic, who is a sponsor of the ethic or the moral code?
Right. I thought it was interesting the comment about the bullying thing, because that's really what you're asking. This idea and concept about resistance is stopping bullying, right? I mean, it can be the simplest thing as like a kid on a playground, and it takes a lot of moral compunction to stand up and support and stand in between somebody's fight that's not your own. It's not your fight. Well, so why are you getting involved? And if you didn't have, what makes a kid want to stand up and say, hey, he's pushing that girl, I'm not going to let him go and push that girl. That's mean. I'm not going to let him do that. Where does he get that from, and that support that he needs? Because he could end up getting pushed, right? But if a father stands behind him and says, son, you ever see a man push a girl, you go, punch that boy in the nose, tell him you leave girls alone, or something like that, because God says that you need to protect women, and that's not okay. That's not all right. And then he's like, oh, okay, well, dad says it. Okay, well, that guy's dad told him that told him to punch the girl or push the girl or something like that. I'd be like, okay, but God is the one who told us to protect her. So, and I'll go punch his dad if he tries to punch that girl or something. But yeah, that foundation I think is pretty critical, because then we can do whatever we want.
Yeah.
Because then it's all about power.
Joseph, could I go back and retake my question?
Please. Yeah. Please.
I think I misunderstood your question a little bit, because really, if the question would have been asking about moral relativism, and it would have been, is there any absolute morals that we live by? Without God, we really don't have any. I remember listening to a discussion one time by a guy named, what was his name? Walter Martin. And he talked to somebody they had a discussion about moral relativism. And the guy was saying there are no absolutes. Everything is just, he was basically taking an existential position. This is what's right for me, and this is what's right for you, and there are no absolute rights. And Walter Martin came up and he said, well, fine. He says, there are no absolute rights. If I want to kill you, I can do that because there are no absolute rights. There's nothing to tell me that it's wrong for me to kill you. And of course, then the guy got quite defensive. But it's true. Without God, where is the moral rectitude? Where are the things that cannot be compromised? If it's just up to the whim of man to determine what is right and wrong. Right. And I mentioned to you, I've been doing some collateral reading in another book, and they pointed out that the founding fathers had that very well ingrained, that apart from God, there was no other legal standard to go by. So that maybe gets more at what you were trying to get at, number 3.
Yeah. Good.
Even though there's no standard to go by, we recognize that the founding fathers were deeply influenced by this, and the words that our entire country reads in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, that language that was shaped by men of deep faith has, even though those people have never read a Bible per se, or never been inside, darkened the door of a church, many people that fit that category have read the words of the Declaration of Independence, and are shaped by the culture that is shaped by those men of faith who penned those words, and the influence we all recognize, or should, that we, the body, have an impact in the world around us, and that God makes his rain to shine, or his rain to fall and his sun to shine on the wicked and the righteous alike. And there is a blessing that takes place to many people through the work of the body in the world. And that, I think the example that he gave of Cooper versus Aaron was an interesting choice in the beginning in talking about interposition and how does that happen. In answer to your question, it's that example is actually the state's example of interposition on behalf of something that we would say was morally wrong, right? Because to those, I don't know if anybody read or just the outline of that, Cooper versus Aaron is the state doing interposition on behalf of those who wanted to still keep segregation. And the federal government is not the lesser magistrate in that case, but the federal government was the one who interposed on behalf of what was perhaps it was clearly the morally right thing. So
So that kind of leads into a little bit like what we're talking about with this next question. We're getting into oaths, and this is talking about the modern magistrate, which, as is defined in the book, is any civil government official with authority elected or appointed, takes an oath of office. And I gave you a link there to what the oath of office in its manifestation is required to be. And so I'm curious, how does the oath of office align with the doctrine of lesser magistrates?
You agree when you swear the oath to uphold the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic, and that doctrine in itself is standing in a gap between people and the federal government by limiting the government's specific powers.
It seems to be intrinsic to the oath itself. It's almost the very basis of the oath.
Yep.
Amen.
Well, when you think about the oath, there's a lot of talk on base right now about everybody having to reaffirm their oath. And there's people who are upset about having to do it. And then there's people who are like, hey, I'm more than willing to reaffirm my oath because I believe in it. But then there's a lot of talk also about how, we'll just say the higher magistrate in this case, admirals, generals, whatever, higher people, the lower people think that sometimes that the people in charge have lost their way. They say the oath, but they don't remember what the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution actually tells them to do, which is not blindly follow. In anybody who's been in the military and officer enlisted, we know that we follow orders, but we're not mindless zombies in the process. And I think that a lot of the guys that I talk to on base right now are feeling like, man, we're just being told what to do regardless of what the morality or the benefit or reason of it is. And so when you talk about the magistrates, it falls into every aspect of life, not just out here in the political scale. It falls into the military scale too. And I feel sorry for these guys right now. So.
I'm also a member of the American Legion, and I'm part of the leadership of the Legion here in Post 141. And every meeting, we affirm that we support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And sometimes I wonder if people know what they're even talking about. because there are so many things in so many ways that the Constitution is being assaulted. If you look at the Bill of Rights, a lot of them have to do with voting and the states being involved in setting the voting standards. Well, today, and I actually think it's coming up, HR 1 is coming up tomorrow, which basically is just going to obliterate just a whole number of constitutional Bill of Rights statements. And I hope some of you have also commented to the Congress about those and the Senate about those, because basically they are saying we're going to ignore the Constitution. And it really gets to me. It really makes me mad.
Yeah.
Because I've sworn oath to defend it, and I wrote the letters. I'll talk to them. I'll go down there and challenge them in their sessions if they want, because this is just wrong.
I was curious on this one aspect of the oath, which is the second part of this this question. You know, does the absence of the oath of office to a citizenry, is that important?
It should be. I mean, if the average citizen knew what the average warfighter knew, especially after a time of conflict, about, or even a military man that's been around the world and seen countries that don't have the same freedoms and liberties we have, that makes a big difference. And I think the average American, the citizenry, if they understood it, they would think more of it. And I think that the majority of them hear the president say the oath when he does his inauguration, and they believe that this man or woman believes what he's saying. So I think the citizenry does believe in it, and I think without it, the citizenry would be hard pressed to accept what the government says or does, whether it could be good, bad, or indifferent. So I think it's important.
In the introduction of the book, it says, second paragraph, if a citizenry does not know the purpose and limitations of the state, then the civil government can misuse its power because the citizenry is unable to measure when something improper is occurring.
Yeah.
If they don't know, they can do nothing.
But as for the leadership itself, if they don't have a moral compass, if they don't believe that they'll be answerable for any decision they make, then their oath really doesn't mean anything. It's you swear an oath, and it's like cross your fingers, and you're just pretending because you really don't believe in the oath because you don't believe in anything.
An oath doesn't mean anything at gunpoint.
Yeah, that's true.
It's meaningful because it's voluntary, because we choose
That's right.
to take the oath.
If it's at gunpoint, it means survival.
Right.
I'm interested in this in this topic because I have downloaded copies of all of my county commissioners' oaths of office, and I keep it on my computer because they swore the very same oath, and I am happy to keep a copy of it and show it to them and remind them that you took this oath on this day. I have it right here. There it is. And you are bound by it. And you didn't swear an oath to me. You didn't swear an oath to even the people that elected you. You swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And that's what you should do. And even if I don't like it. And I think, to me, the essence of this question was really what that is about, is that, people may have consternation because they feel like their elected officials are not doing what they're doing, and even look at the other side, right? They're like, well, you're hurting people and saving people and da-da-da-da, whatever. But that's really irrelevant when the constitutionality of it is what's at stake, because you may have people that have to do things that the citizen doesn't like to protect them.
Absolutely. I would 100% agree that we have, as citizens, have a responsibility. We can quickly look to our elected officials and say, well, there are our appointed magistrates. They're the ones that should be taking the stand against the tyrannical things that the government is doing, or things that are being pressed upon us. But the reality is, if you're, and that was one of the reasons the Japanese had said, or actually it was the Chinese, I take it back, that had said they wouldn't invade America many years ago, because behind every blade of grass was an American with a gun type thing. And so there was, in other words, there's tons and tons of them. Well, that probably has changed with a lot of America, but I guess my point is that we have a responsibility as a citizenry. We can't just rely on our elected officials to carry the mantle for us. We absolutely have to be informed, be educated, as we're trying to do for ourselves now. And with that, we have to take action when we are being wronged, or our people are being wronged, the people of America, other citizenry, whatever, the citizenry in general are being wronged. We have to take affirmative action against it, or affirmative is the wrong term. We need to take absolute action against it. And if we had been doing that for many years, even in the recent last 10 years, had been taking more solid action, we wouldn't find ourselves where we're at. We, as a people, generally didn't take as much action as we should have, and we have been boxed into a little bit of a corner. Now all of a sudden, we're able to put together groups like WICC, where we've tried to do some things like that in the past, Todd and I and a few others, and we weren't able to get the same kind of level of participation we do now. Now there's more pressure, the heat is on, people are listening, they're feeling it. Some people, and the good news is that the left, this bad and good at the same time, but the left has turned the heat up so fast that the frogs are starting to jump out of the pot, and it's made evident their plan, rather than doing it in a slow enough fashion like they have been doing in the past. Those, you had to be a studier and be aware of what was taking place around you in order to truly be informed. But if you weren't watching not the mainstream media, but if you weren't doing your due diligence of your homework over the last 10, 15 years, you really weren't probably all that aware, or it wasn't a big enough deal to you that you actually took action. Now, not that, again, I've said this before too, if you went back 40 years ago, where people would have drawn a line in the sand, would be very different than where most people, the average person, would draw a line in the sand. We drew a line in the sand, it got crossed. 40 years ago, we drew another line in the sand, it got crossed again, and we've just been pushed back. Now all of a sudden we're backed into a corner, and now you've lit up Americans in a way that we're going to defend ourselves, hopefully without violence, but instead by taking action. But ultimately, it could lead to violence too, which would be very unfortunate. And I think that's what the left wants, truly. I believe they're pushing for civil war. Again, you got to think like the enemy when you say something like that. It's so evil sounding, but if you think like the enemy, who's the enemy of mankind, is his enemy, his number one, he can't take action against God, but he can influence mankind. If they get mankind to self-destruct and start killing each other, then that's a win in his book for sure.
Right. Yeah. I quoted here for this next question from page 6, and was very intrigued when we had Matt Shea come by this past weekend and echo the same sentiment. And so I'd like to just bat it around. So he basically says the act of interposition requires a willingness to risk personal security for the sake of justice. Such risk is paramount to the lesser magistrate. And so how should, put yourself in the mind of a lesser magistrate, how should the lesser magistrate view these risks in an act of interposition?
As a necessity.
Never fun, never something you want to do, but in that position as an elected official, when you're taking that oath, you got to be taking it serious, because you could find yourself in that position defending that oath, and it could be putting your life on the line. Certainly putting yourself in harm's way.
I think that if they choose to uphold an unjust law, they should view it as a rebellious against God.
If it's coming down?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, we know what's right and what's wrong, and because we have a foundation, and so we have to share that foundation. And if we don't have those magistrates that are willing, I mean, for instance, if you joined the military, you're willing to step up and put your life on the line for what you believe in, right? And so I think that politicians or the people that we elect should be at least as willing to do that as our 18-year-old kids who join the military. And
Mhm.
so it's important to be willing to put other people in front of you, because if you don't do that, you can't expect somebody else to do it for you as well. Do unto others, right?
And this also comes down to every single position that we've gotten. I think what this is saying is that anybody who sees something that is wrong being done by someone who's in power, they need to be called out. And sometimes when you have to call people out, you're not going to be the most popular person on the block. You're going to end up on the media. You're going to get crucified. You're going to get death threats. And that's what this is saying is you need to stand up for what's right, period. There's no choice in the matter.
Look how wild and crazy the left goes when something as simple as a letter calling out Black Lives Matter for what it is, like Stina's letter recently and the one that went up north, how wildly the left has gone after them on the attack. That's not so much in harm's way, but taking a stand where they should. Yet these people are they're going to try to stop any kind of anything that would stop their momentum or their motion or their wins. Again, cancel culture, lies, they stop at nothing. They appear to have no real morals for the most part. Their morals are
Yeah, I think it comes down to
significantly
personal
declined.
fortitude.
And in comparison, we're sleeping.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at it this way. Look at what was FBI Director Wray stood up in Congress yesterday and lied to everybody, and said that there was no evidence at all that there was any Antifa or BLM involvement in the Capitol thing, right? And so we know that to be a lie because we saw it, and they arrested a man that claimed that he helped instigate this whole thing and self-identified as Antifa. But this guy Ray is just going to stand up and totally lie. So it's fortitude. It's not for everybody, and it's hard to pick and choose. And you don't know what somebody's going to do under pressure. And I think I hate to say it, but I feel like in today's world, most people are going to fold. I just feel that way. I see it happening around me, and I mean I'm 53, and if I have to go down, I'm going to go down fighting in a blaze of glory. So
Yeah.
It's because we've been taught to cooperate so much.
That's
Our
right.
whole lives, we're just not.
We're not willing to step out of our box
Yeah.
because
I was,
that's all we've ever done.
I was in a
Why?
I was in a meeting yesterday with a person who is not necessarily an elected official, but holds a position of influence, and intimated that he would be taking a serious risk by standing up for what was right over against his boss, and didn't do it. Didn't do it, you know. And I think that's exactly what the problem is.
It's intestinal fortitude, like what Tim said. Intestinal fortitude, like Churchman Ambrose had, to stand up and not allow the emperor entry into the church. Okay, that takes a tremendous amount of intestinal fortitude, knowing that your life's on the line, knowing that you can be killed at just a click of the finger, but willing to stand up for what you believe is right. And I think if you're not centered in the things of the Lord, then it's very difficult to have that position of fortitude.
Bingo.
Yeah. I think the big thing about it is, I mean, we can call it power or money or whatever the thing is that they feel like they're going to risk by standing up and saying whatever, like, oh, I'm going to lose my position, I'm going to lose the influence that I have, or something like that, and not and not focusing on what's right and what you actually gain, what you gain by doing the right thing.
Yeah. I was just
And
going to say, Joe, on this, it comes down to who we acknowledge as the rule maker, the law. And the left has completely moved in the direction of the state is the one that has all the power. They are the ones that determine the law. How can you challenge that? But if you say, no, 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 God is the only authority. He is the one that delegates power to a number of different spheres, and you have to be willing to challenge him and stand before him judgment day. You know, I'm reading another book about the Christian heritage of our Constitution. And in the early founding of our country, it was required for people who wanted to serve in office, they had to be Christians. They had to acknowledge a higher power or they could not serve. And that made it really easy for the lesser magistrates to appeal to that higher power that they were supposed to be acknowledging. In the day that we're living in today, it's beginning to get harder. And now we have to appeal not only to God and hope they listen to us, but we have to also appeal to their conscience and appeal to things that they've said before. I like what you said, Joe, about holding them accountable to their constitution or their agreement. But it was a little bit easier in earlier days because people acknowledged a higher power, which was and is God.
Right. Oh, even in a courtroom, right? In a courtroom, you're not allowed to lie. You're not allowed to perjure yourself. You have to swear to God that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me, God, right? They put their hand on the Bible and they have to raise their right hand before they can testify. That they have to know that whatever they say, regardless of what happens among men, that God is going to hold them accountable in this instance, and specifically calling out the ninth commandment, that you shall not bear false witness. How do you even engage in law without assuring that you have truth that's being held accountable in the divine realm? So.
Here we come back to the issue of moral relativism. And if you have no higher power, you are the one who determines what is right or wrong. And of course, situational ethics tells us under certain situations, you can lie. And what we've have happening even in the political realm today is it's okay to commit violence, to lie, to cheat, to put machines that give you the false evidence because of their moral relativism. And we really have to fight back to having people acknowledge there is a higher power in the universe and you are not it.
So in the book, he gave a lot of examples, and I'd really encourage you to go to those passages that he talked about, and even specifically the biblical ones, and just demonstrating that interposition is a biblical concept. It happens over and over and over with men standing in the gap. And so when we read that stuff, that's what I'm curious about with this next question. You know, how do all these examples of interposition, both the biblical and historical ones, how do they affect what we expect of our magistrates?
I love that question, and I love the example that he chooses to use Daniel and the mandate of prayer as the example, and that Daniel doesn't go to the king and say, you know, king, that mandate, your law is a garbage law. You know, he doesn't go oppose it that way. He simply disobeys, right? You know, which is, yeah, as we choose how, there are many methods of interposition that I think that's speaking to, and that
Or resistance. A resistance.
Of resistance, exactly. There are a lot of methods of resistance, and whether it's an outspoken protest or by tacit action, there are a lot of ways to do it, and it's important, I think, to use them all, you know, and in the right context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Daniel wasn't bashful. He took a stand with windows open 3 times a day, and he was drawing negative attention toward himself, but taking a stand that was him doing the right thing, and God protected him for it too. And God doesn't always do that. God loves his people, but there's no guarantee if you get thrown in the lion's den that you're not going to get nailed, but you will have stood for the right thing along the way. Which God
So
will
how does
honor
that compare to
eternally.
today? That's the kind of the question, right, Joe? Is you're trying to say, how does the biblical and non-biblical references compare to what's going on today? And I think Justin had it right. You know, sometimes you just got to resist. And Patrick, you guys had it nailed. I'll give you kind of a for instance. Don't wear the mask. At work, we've got this bonehead lefty guy, and there's only a couple of them there out of the 30, 35 of us that are there. But he runs around all day long putting up masks must be worn at all times stickers all over or pieces of paper with it printed on it all over the place all day long, all over work, right? Drives me freaking bananas because it's not his job to do that. He's just taking that upon himself. So I try to return the drive people bananas favor, and I run around behind him and pull them all down and put them in the shredder. And so this is a daily occurrence. It goes on day after day after day. But I go into a grocery store, and the lady at the front door says, you have to put on your mask. And I most of the time, I don't even acknowledge. I just keep on walking. If they persist, I just tell them I can't wear a mask. And I keep on going. And so that's the thing. And then when people see me not wearing a mask, I've had people come up to me and pull their mask down and say, hey, man, I wish I could get away with it like you do. And I say, well, you can. You just have
You
to.
can.
It's
Gotta do
amazing.
Go like
got-
this.
I've got a permit.
And so
That's the secret.
Right. But what Daniel did is what we need to do today. We don't have to go scream at the courthouse and the governor's mansion telling them how crappy this law is, because we all know that, and it's not even a law, this mandate. But we just don't wear the mask. We pray in an open window 3 times a day, right? We don't wear the mask. That's just one example. There's many. I mean, I could take up the rest of the night giving you examples that I've went through over the last year and a half doing this political thing that I don't know if I was ever cut out for to begin with. But it's tough, and you just got to do it. And you're going to be ridiculed, and you're going to be pushed around, and you're going to be belittled, and people are going to give you the stink eye, and you just got to have the fortitude to keep doing it.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm
So
going
what
to
are
do.
some of the, beyond just not wearing masks, so this, I don't want to get us too far off track here, but I'll just throw the question out there. What are some of the things that we can be doing as a group of folks who are like-minded? As an example, one of the suggestions that got thrown out in recent, I heard it on Bards FM, Scott Kesterson, and I think Matt Shea said something similar. What if we as a group go to our grocery stores, 25 of us at a time or whatever, on Saturdays, midday, we're meeting at noon, going to the grocery store in a place where we know they're going to want to enforce masks, and we go in without masks. We're not disrespectful, we're kind, we're nice, but we're standing our ground, saying what we need to say. We're making a bigger statement than us individually. They're not going to arrest 25 of us, and it would be
Just
kind of fun if they did.
coordinated shopping.
Yeah, coordinated shopping. So you all
I'm in.
do it together, and then meet at the
Yeah.
front in a half hour or whatever.
We'll do that.
And
I'm happy to do that. We got to pick
yeah.
the place that's the most anti-mask, maybe like Payless.
Yeah.
Would we be better
Absolutely.
off spending our energy and our focus in calling our elected leaders, including the ones that are here on the island, to the table and expecting them to stand their ground for us? Because, you know, calling out people in the grocery store, you're just making some people that aren't being paid a lot of money extremely miserable, when we can go, you know, visit Joe Johnson and Melanie Bacon and see what they have to say.
that sounds great.
Commissioner hearing meetings.
Yeah, commissioner hearings meetings. Yeah, and don't wear a mask when you go talk to them. But you're right, Dan. But we can do both. That's the thing.
Well, what I'm getting at is the people that are working at these grocery stores, they're following their rules so they don't lose their job.
Right.
Yep.
Do we want to do that to them? and give ourselves a name as acting like those freaking Democrats? Or do we want to be the bigger people and show who we truly are and go stand our ground with the people that are responsible for this, not the people that are being sacrificed with it?
And how far do you take that? So I agree with you, Dan. That is a better stance for sure. And then how far do you take it? You go to their offices, you go until you're not heard any longer, and then
Well,
you start
you-
going
you
to their
start by
homes, and
following
stand outside
process.
their homes.
You
What's
start
that?
by following process. You go to the commissioner meeting as a group. And, you know, one thing that was confirmed at the last commission, or one of the last commissioner meetings that Corbin Graham was actually at, they allowed someone to give Corbin their 3-minute talking time, which means that they've set a precedent that says that if you show up, you get your 3 minutes talking time. And if anybody else in the audience that happened to sign up for public comment, they can gift that talking time to whoever's talking, which means we could put someone like you, Justin, or Mr. Graham on that podium with a prepared speech that's, 47 minutes long.
Yeah.
We can make their lives completely miserable. Let's hold these people accountable.
With everyone in the background agreeing with what's being presented. Yeah.
Right. If we go to the grocery store and make people's lives miserable just for the fun of it, they're not going to hear our message, number one. And number two, they're going to be against us.
Well,
And we want to do
Not
what's
just, but it's
effective.
not
You're
just
right.
the grocery store workers. It's about
Yeah,
telling
it's this-
everybody else who sees.
Yeah,
you know,
it's a
the
social
industry,
statement. It's a
empowering
social force.
everybody. Yeah,
I
exactly.
guess your guys' idea of a social statement is different than mine because that social statement affects people and their jobs.
Okay, but the thing is with interposition or whatever, a resistance, we do want our magistrates to resist on our behalf, but like with something like the masks, you want to empower the people that they don't have to do the bullshit.
I agree with that statement. However, have any of us on this call taken our fight to our elected officials that are supposed to be our lesser magistrates?
Mm-hmm.
Before we
Including
start
the sheriffs.
rebelling, let's take
Yep.
some stance that we need to call these people accountable and give them a chance to be our lesser magistrate before we go raise holy hell in our little community that everybody knows each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's a good point. But we've been fighting this fight for what, a little over a year now, and people have been writing letters to their congressmen and their senators and their mayors, and they've been at their city councils, and what happens is there's no ramification of these elected officials. There's no ramification to these elected officials to keep enforcing this mandate or to be silent about this mandate, because everybody's just marching off the cliff together without any resistance out in the world. So I mean, I'm down. I would totally go get in Melanie Bacon's face. You know me, Dan. I got no problem with that. But and I will.
Have you?
I haven't gotten to Melanie Bacon.
Because, I watch all our city council meetings. We don't have anybody in our community standing up for this stuff.
Yeah, well, I've talked
So
to
all
Joe
I'm saying
Johnson.
is before we go jump in the pool and make a big splash publicly, let's hold the people that we all voted for accountable.
I agree. That's an important first step.
Yep.
And,
So
and
let's do
our
it.
and our next meeting is coming up. It's either the 16th or 18th. I don't know if anybody remembers, but we need to be intentional and attend. Come prepared. We've got 3 minutes at the podium or the platform. Well, I guess it's all Zoom, so all you got to do is click, and you're in. I wish it was
Yeah.
face to face because I think we'd be
And
more
that's the
effective.
problem.
That's the
Right,
problem.
and it's a problem, and that's why they keep it this way, because they know that there's no emotion tied to it. They know there's no fear tied. If I'm standing in front of their faces, letting them have it, that's different than talking to you guys over a Zoom meeting.
But can you imagine being Melanie Bacon sitting in her cushy commissioner office and receiving, what do we got, 19 people on this call? Receiving 19 voicemail messages every single day for the next 49 days until she finally starts to listen.
Send out the numbers.
If we organize that way, we have some limitations because of this bullshit virus.
Yeah.
But we can also take advantage of it, guys. We just got to get smart about it. But our emotions, we can't let overtake us because that's the Democrats' fault. That's how they fail. They let their emotions overtake them and they go burn buildings down thinking that they're making a statement that nobody can understand. Because I don't know about you guys, but I look at them all going, what the fuck are you trying to, sorry. what the hell are you trying to do?
Mhm.
You know?
I know exactly what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
I'm on
So send
I'm
it
on board.
over, Dan.
I'm on board with both. I'm still happy with demonstrating to the public that this is okay, that this is
But
acceptable.
if we're going to demonstrate to the public, let's do it in a way that they actually understand what our message is. Because, you know, on Tim Haslow's point, you know, he's seen all these city council meetings around the country that have had people standing up at them. But again, here we do not. If we're going to get our message out to people, we don't want to go in without our mask on, because the only thing, just picture it. I mean, I'm playing this through my head. A whole pile of us all walk in there, you end up on the news. Okay, and how do they phrase us? They
For
don't
shopping.
phrase us as freedom-loving, American-loving, family people. They phrase us as terrorists.
See, I'm not thinking of like staging I didn't get the impression that it was like stage a protest at the grocery store. I think it was just, hey, everyone, we're shopping at Payless at noon, and do your shopping at Payless at noon. You got 25 random people just showing up, going through the store, buying all their stuff, and that's it.
And people have done this, and I've seen it on the news, and whether we want it to be a protest or not, it will quickly become one when the management staff all approach everybody, and then we all stand our ground. So the only thing I'm saying is, we just took control of the Republican Party. Let's do it right. Let's do it effectively. And let's put some thought behind it with some strategy. Emotion is a driver to keep us going, but emotion is not a plan of attack.
Good input.
All right, good deal. So let's keep pressing here. I'd like to go ahead and give us 10 more minutes as best we can. So we've got the last three questions, and we may not get to the end of them, but that's okay. So the Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates, he presents the 4 realms of government, not to the exclusivity of the work sphere, pastor, but primarily understood as the person, the individual, their family, their church, and then the civil government. And all of them fall under God with delegated real and limited authority. And so how does this Christian foundation affect the understanding of authority?
I think at every level of government, we are, again, it's different. I guess I'm trying to think it through as self, family, church, and civil. We are definitely to take a stance on any position that is not in alignment with God's laws, God's rule of the land, is in alignment with the Bible. And, you know, some issues are bigger than others, but here we talk about something as simple as a mask, and it is the mask we recognize as a step toward things to come, such as the little pinprick that is killing people and causing all kinds of medical issues, and more to come. So I think it applies a little different. Obviously, we defend ourselves in one sense because we have to be able to stand on our own 2 feet in order to take care of our family. That's a primary driver for me, is to be able to take care of. That's part of why I go and do the training that I do, that I've put the food away that I have and things along those lines, is to take care of my family first and foremost, then becomes my church family, and not so much for civil, especially civil that doesn't agree with, I guess we're talking civil government. It's unfortunate, but there is so much of the government that I tend to feel like even people wearing R's in front of their names that aren't acting the way we would like them to, that are the reason for us taking the kind of action we have in our own local Island County Republican Party. Now, we have taken a more substantial action because we were seeing inaction. We weren't seeing a stand against the business as usual was okay. A little bit of corruption was okay. It was being accepted and even endorsed in cases. And we stood against it and said, not here, not in our county. And so every one of those levels, to me, I can see areas for anything that, again, that's tyrannical or not in alignment with God's word, we need to take a stand against. Does that mean you pick a fight everywhere you go, everything you do? No, you got to be strategic about it, but you do have to take a stand for sure.
Joe, I think that I actually sent you a sermon from 2017 on this very issue. And again, there is no higher authority than God, and yet God works in these different realms. And the realms aren't allowed to overstep one another. God has certain things the government is supposed to do. I love what our declaration says. They are to protect our rights. That's what the government is supposed to do. They're not to overstep that boundary and move into the family and say, you have to have only 2 kids. If you have a 3rd kid, you got to abort it. You know, the government has no right to say that, and that's what they do say in China, because we acknowledge that God is the one that gives authority in these different realms. And whether you're talking about the church, the family, the government, Joe work, God has different requirements in each one of those, and he puts heads. The husband is the head of the family. That's what the Bible tells me. Christ is the head of the church. We obey him. And by the way, every one of these realms that we're talking about here, Jesus makes reference to as standing by themselves. And so we simply have to acknowledge them and say, wait a minute, government, you can't cross over into the family in this area. Don't tell me I have to teach my kids about your kind of sex education, because I don't agree to that, and I am the one that's in charge of that in my family. And we need to treat each one of these realms that way. I think the author of the book here could have went into a little more detail, but he gives a couple of real good examples. I saw one of them flash up here on the screen about if a husband says, we're going to murder our kids tonight. No, wait a minute. That's a capital offense. The government says you're not to murder. Not only that, God says you're not to murder. You can't do that, Father. You don't have the authority to do that. Regardless of what your kid does, you don't have the authority to kill them. And so we need to recognize these different realms and acknowledge them, and also be willing to draw the lines and say, this is the line. You cannot cross over into this realm. God has given authority to me, or God has given authority to my boss, or God has given authority to the church, and we need to keep those lines clearly defined.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's worth exploring and understanding how much authority do these different offices have? How much authority does the family have? What's its sphere of what it's responsible for? And I mean, fundamentally, I'll just give you the cliff notes for what I've understood. Family responsible for education, family responsible for welfare, family responsible for property, family responsible for inheritance, family responsible for health. Really, if you want to talk about the sphere with the most authority in the whole Bible, it's the family. And then because the church has very limited, the church is over the sacraments and over the preaching, teaching the word, and then discipline within the church, right? And the civil government also has a small sphere. So like the way the Bible describes it, really where we have the most power is where we're most decentralized. That's why all of our families can look so different, and it's totally fine, because how you want to educate your kids, the left wants to educate their kids with all kinds of weird stuff. Go ahead and do that. Whatever you want to do in your home, totally. But yeah, it's pretty important if we can learn that and separate those things and hold the spheres accountable to that. I don't let my church tell me, what I do in my home. They have no business doing that. I'll tell pastor to go, thanks pastor, but no thanks.
Agree.
I love that the book uses the Romans 13 to articulate the limitations of civil authority, rather than the opposite, and that just the clear affirmation that those powers don't come from the state, that those things are from God. And that's the fight we fight, because within the philosophy of the day, those powers, my authority as a father, according to others, comes from the state, and that they have the right to to make those decisions and reach inside of my realm. And so, how do you fight against that? And I think he articulates that very clearly and very well.
Yeah, and those are kind of get to the last two questions, which are really, really, really big, big subjects and big topics. But a divine source of authority, which is essentially what the questions 8 and 9 are hitting at. The Declaration, he talks about this, recognizes the source of our rights, right? God is the one who gives us our freedoms that we enjoy, and governments are just meant to secure or protect them. And by having this divine source of rights versus a secular source of rights, like what happens in the UN, for question 9, is a radically different foundation and has radically different implications for society. And so, what's the difference? Like, and I think we probably could just turn on the news and maybe see the difference from a divine source of rights versus an autonomous source of rights or a secular source of rights.
Well, I was thinking I would touch on question 8 rather than 9. You kind of broadened it out to both questions. It talks about here in the introduction, it gives you a little blurb. Men will endure a long train of abuses and usurpations only to a certain point. And so for those of us who have read the Declaration of Independence, I'm assuming all of us have, but it really gets into it in there, right? And it says that men will endure all kinds of grievances. We'll take it until we just can't take it anymore, because it's easier than fighting back. It's easier to just maintain the status quo. But when the status quo gets to a point where we can no longer accept it, no longer live our lives with the freedoms and the liberties that we all believe we should have, that's when men stand up. And that's when we fight back. That's when we become that fill the gap that Joe was talking about and they talk about in the book. And so I think, with all that being said, and until we understand our founding documents and why those documents were put in place and what the inspiration of those documents were, which we all know is Christianity, I think that's where they're taking us out, is by removing our beliefs at that blank slate, Joe, that you were talking about, removing our beliefs at the blank slate point, and generationally they're removing our ability to influence our children and to continue this generational influence of godliness in foundation moving forward. So I think, I don't know how you guys feel, but I think we're almost at that point of a Declaration of Independence type moment. And I think this book really just brings it out even more. I don't know if I felt as strongly before I read the book as I feel now. I felt pretty strongly then, and then I read this book. and now I'm, I'm not going to say I'm full of fire and brimstone, but yeah, I probably should just stop right there.
That's good. We don't need any revolutions tonight. Plus, I've seen your writing, and it would be tough. So good. Well, any other last shots here? I want to respect people's time, and we can get a chance to go ahead and save rounds.
Joe, I was just going to say that I am reading a book right now. I mentioned it to you in an email, that the Christian foundation of our Constitution, and the authors that our founding fathers deferred to, Blackstone, John Locke, Ceausescu. These guys were all solid Christian men. They're writing biblical principles. And we don't see a lot of Bible references in either the Declaration or the Constitution, but that doesn't mean that the authors and the people in those conventions weren't full of the teachings of Scripture and full of the Spirit. What was going on is, in that day, we had the freedom of religion. Religion was not a lot of different types of religion. It was Christianity. A religion was, you're a Baptist, you're a Methodist, you're a Lutheran, you're a Congregationalist. That's what it meant by different religions. In fact, in as late as 1895, they said Buddhism and Mohammedanism were no religions at all. That was a Supreme Court decision. And so it was Christianity that formed the basis for all the religions, and therefore the guys writing the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence didn't want to step into other people's denominational beliefs, and so that's why they kept it kind of neutral. But they were, all of them were biblicists. I mean, one of the guys that is one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, Thompson, had the Thompson Chain Bible. He's the first guy ever in history to translate the Greek Septuagint into English. And so these guys were not just run-of-the-mill Sunday-only Christians. They were people that lived the faith. And that's the people who founded our Constitution. And that's why when they put in there, we are endowed with by certain rights by our Creator, unalienable rights. They all knew what they were talking about. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It really was life, liberty, and property. A man has a right to amass a estate that should not be infringed upon. But the reason they turned it to pursuit of happiness was because some considered slaves as property. And our founding fathers said, we want to get that out of the Constitution because we want to acknowledge that all men are created equal. And so these things were all based upon the Bible, upon these authors that our founders read, and passed that heritage down. And that's why people could appeal to the magistrates and said, because they all had that common belief that there was a higher power, and that power is God.
Amen. Anybody else? Any other parting thoughts here? All right, I will call for a prayer. I'm going to ask Mr. Reichman. Patrick, will you pray? Will you close us, please?
Absolutely, Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah. Father, you are a sovereign God, and you hold the whole world in your hands and as your creation, and you set all things according to your will and your purpose. Give us peace and hope, courage, wisdom to walk into that, to live into it, to walk in confidence with our heads up, knowing that you are our Father. Keep us safe and be with us. Bring us all back together next week. Pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.